In order to deliver great supports, you need to have great training. For those that don't know me, my name is Jonathan Power, and I spent the last 8 years working as an NDIS provider. Building inductions and delivering them was a huge part of that. So I'm just gonna run through how we structured ours, how we delivered them, and the parts that I found super useful for bringing on new support workers. Now, before we get into it, what I'm gonna cover is your basic kind of entry-level support worker induction. If you've been doing this for a while, you're probably gonna go a little bit deeper than this. I thought this is kind of like a good entry-level induction for a lot of businesses who are kind of new, who are just starting to train people and create some expectations and just share what worked for me. So first of all, start with your company. Kick it off with information about your business, not the corporate stuff that no one listens to, the real stuff like why you got started, what's your backstory, what's your connection to the industry, and why did you start your business? Talk about your real mission, I guess your vision for the company and where you see yourself going. Who are the people you're actually trying to serve? What does it feel like to work at your company and what's the company culture like? This is gonna set the tone for everything else that comes after. One of the things that we did at our company is we had a set of company principles and we used to have them up on the wall in the induction room. And the first one that we spoke about and the one that mattered most to us was support workers first, always. We always wanted to put our staff first, because we knew if we looked after our staff, they would in turn look after all of our participants. And that was a big thing for us. So before you get into any of the policy stuff, frame the company, frame the values, talk about what's the direction of the company and why you exist. Make sure the people that have just joined the business understand why they've joined. From here, it's into company policies and procedures. What to do if they have to call in sick, who they can talk to if they've got a problem, does your company have HR, have you got certain managers that they need to report to, talk about the structure of the business, the reporting lines, who do they call if they're sick, how do they submit their annual leave, how do they do their timesheets, all that sort of stuff I kind of do here in regards to like company processes, and then your actual company policies. So think about, code of conduct, participant policies, complaints and feedback policies, all these sorts of things. Now, the thing about company policies and procedures is they're super dry, right? Everyone's seen like a policy handbook, they're massive, probably the driest part of the induction. So be strategic about when you deliver this stuff. Front loaded. People are gonna be tired by the end of the day. They're gonna be zoning out. They're gonna be falling asleep. Like I actually had a guy fall asleep. Wasn't in policies and procedures. It was actually at the beginning of the day, but this stuff happens. So do this stuff at the beginning. The other thing is, make it easy to understand. Don't just give someone a 10-page policy. Abridge it is what we call it. So an abridged policy is like a shortened version, a digestible version of your policies that's easy to read, that you just get the core things in that policy to the support worker so they can read it and it's not getting drawn out over 10 pages. In saying that, you can still give them the full policy pack. Just when you're going through them together, probably best to go through the short, easy to read version. Now, you also want to make sure that they've signed off on those policies and procedures. So you want to have some sort of document that you're going to store on the person's profile to indicate that they've read and they've understood those policies and procedures. And so if you haven't got a CRM that is currently giving you the ability to store and track support worker policies and procedures, feel free to check out Astalty. I'll leave a link in the description and you can start your free 14-day trial, no credit card required. And so the next thing you want to do is prepare them for the supports. Now, before we get into the actual supports, we always used to start with a little bit of context. How has disability support evolved over time and kind of give a bit of history? And so for a long time, all around the world, the medical model of disability was kind of the dominant approach, right? So people with a disability were seen as having something wrong with them and they needed to be fixed, which is why so many people were institutionalized, segregated, and kept out of public life, is because they were assumed that there was something wrong with them, right? The disability itself was treated as the problem. And so the social model of disability flips that and has a completely different view. It says the barriers around a person's disability are what actually hold them back. The physical barriers, the attitudinal barriers, the systemic ones. So rather than treating the person as the problem to be fixed, the focus is on removing those barriers and giving people the right support to participate fully in their community. It's a big difference between the old way of thinking about disability and the new way. So we like to give context to support workers and ask them to kind of reflect on that and then pivot into the actual supports that we deliver. And we kind of do that just to kind of shape, what we're trying to achieve at our company. You might have a different approach, but I think it's always nice just to go from like that old way of thinking about people with a disability into the social model of disability and what it's like these days. And so after we kind of introduce them to the medical model, the social model, we kind of dive into the supports that we deliver. And so we did a lot of community access support. So the way that we did our induction, what we focused on might be slightly different to yours, but shape your induction towards whatever support you deliver to better prepare these new support workers. And I think one of the most important things here is like making sure people understand the why. The whole NDIS is underpinned by goals and outcomes, and every shift has a purpose, right? A lot of new support workers need to know that from day one. And from the outside looking in, you might think that disability support is something else. It's, just doing fun stuff, the cliche, going to the movies, going bowling, going to the beach. And whilst those aspects of social life come into play in some aspects, for sure, it's not what the job is about. So I think people really need to understand that, hey, we're working towards people's goals here. We're working towards outcomes here, and it's not just going to the movies, right? I think it's always important to chat about that. If you deliver different services, maybe it's less important, totally up to you. So you're chatting about your company, you're chatting about why you exist, you're chatting about how you support participants, and then I like to kind of just run through what a shift looks like, right? If it's in-home supports, it might be a 2-hour shift. Maybe you go through the run sheet, you knock on the door, you ask to come in, you assist with medication prompting, maybe you go through the self-care routine, maybe then you get ready for the day. Whatever a normal day in the life of a support worker looks like at your business, run through that so people have a good understanding of what to expect. Now we're talking about brand new support workers here, so if someone's super green, highly recommend going through shadow shifts with them or multiple shadow shifts as part of your induction and onboarding. Never just send someone out without a shadow shift. If they've never worked in this industry, or if someone is a little bit anxious about getting a new support worker and needs that introduction, highly recommend doing that as well, just to make the transition go easy, put the participant's anxiety at ease, and make sure this person is set up for success, getting trained by someone who's familiar with that participant, right? The other really important thing that we used to speak about is duty of care and dignity of risk. Now, we used to play a video for this in every induction. It was about 10 minutes long, wasn't too long. It really broke down dignity of risk and duty of care in a simple format that anyone could understand. And it kind of went through the balance of like keeping someone safe versus respecting their choices to make their own decisions. I'll drop a link in the description below if anyone's interested. And it just helped your support workers understand the difference between the two. And so it's really important that your support workers understand the difference between being too risk averse, meaning they're not going to allow the participant to do anything or engage in anything, versus on the other end of the spectrum, they're going to be too carefree, and they're going to potentially put a participant's life in danger. So it's important for them to understand kind of playing in the middle and understanding both ends of the spectrum, which this video does really well. And then depending on the disabilities you support, you probably want to give your team some real insight into how to support those people. Now, if you support a huge range of demographics of people with a disability, this is going to be quite difficult because you can't teach someone everything about supporting someone with an intellectual disability and then physical disabilities and then, mental health, all in one sit down, right? It's quite intense. So you can give them kind of baseline entry-level information, but what I would do is encourage them to go away and do further training in relation to those disabilities to better understand how to support them. And what we did is we used to subscribe to a platform that had hundreds and hundreds of videos on all sorts of disabilities, and that really helped educate our staff on how to support the different types of people that we supported as well. One thing that I did cover in every induction is active support. And this is all about building someone's independence. Because we played in the community access space, the capacity building space, this was a big one for us. And so one of the core principles for active support is do with, not for. So let's say that you've got a participant and their goal is to do their own shopping. So rather than you turning up to the support, asking them what they need, and then going to the shops for them, it means actively engaging with the participant to get them to understand how they can be involved with doing their own shopping and build on those skills. So you'd be asking them things like, what food do you need? What have you got left in the fridge? What are you gonna run out of this week? Sit down with them, ask them to help, write the list, or at least give you some prompting so you can write the list. And you're kind of doing this together, right? You go to the shops together, you go to the checkout together. If they need some assistance, you're there to help, but you're doing it with them, you're not doing everything for them. And if you think about the NDIS, it's built on capacity building, right? So if you're going and doing all of these things for someone with a disability, you're actually taking away from their capacity. You're actually limiting their capacity because you're not allowing them to do it, right? You're making them less capable, which is exactly the opposite of what we're here to do. Now, in this disability section, one thing that I always touch on as well is boundaries. And so blurred boundaries are huge in this space, and I always make a point of covering this in the induction. And so there's a really good video on this on Open Future Learning on YouTube. It's called Friendly But Not Friends. I'll leave a link in the description. Check it out. Feel free to show it to people in the team. Very valuable resource. And the whole crux of it is you're there to do a job. You're not there to be a friend. You're there to do a job, a professional service. And the relationship should always be professional, not personal, not a friendship. You're there to build rapport, absolutely, but understand the distinction. And this matters more than people realize, right? I've seen participants get very, very close to a certain support worker, and then all of a sudden that person leaves the job, and then the participant actually goes backwards. They get distraught. They don't get support for weeks because they're still recovering from the trauma of that person leaving. Because to them, they thought it was a friendship and they misunderstood the relationship. So it's really important for your workers to kind of establish those boundaries and put things in place to make sure that there's a clear distinction about where the role starts and ends. You know, we had a very strong policy around not giving out phone numbers, not having people on Facebook, trying to keep those clear boundaries in place. And so we've got more compliance. I know we spoke about policy and procedure, but there's so much compliance in this industry for good reason. And I didn't want to front load all of this stuff with policy and procedure. And so what we like to do is we like to sprinkle the other compliance throughout the induction. So it's not too much, you're not just front loading that first day with so much dry stuff. Wherever possible, sprinkle it throughout the induction, right? And you'll understand what I mean in a second. So think about workplace health and safety, infection control, incident reporting, what actually constitutes an incident, restricted practices, mandatory reporting, how to make a complaint, and how to give feedback. Now, these are all important because your auditor is going to be looking at, has your team completed any training in this area? And what we like to do is we kind of bundled all of this up into our induction because it's a requirement. Your staff need to know this stuff, so you may as well teach them up front. So 2 birds, 1 stone. You meet your audit requirements and you teach staff up front. So I'm gonna finish up with some handy hints and some ongoing education, right? First of all, keep your videos short, keep them under 5 minutes. Anything longer than that, people zone out. I know I said that dignity of risk, duty of care video was like 10 minutes. That's probably the exception. Always try and mix it up. Never play back-to-back videos for 2 days straight. People are not gonna take anything in. Have a good mixture of face-to-face stuff versus videos and a mixture of activities as well. Try and get people involved. If you've got people in there that have worked in the space before, ask them about their experiences, get them to share wherever possible. Now, the big one here is ongoing education. If you sit down for 2 days, it's so much information to be cramming into your staff. And the big realization for us was we would run a 2-day induction with mountains of information, and then in 3 months, people were making the same mistakes over and over again. And like my first instinct was like, why aren't they doing what they're trained to do? And then I sat back and kind of reflected, and I was thinking, I was like, they've just sat through a 2-day induction. It's so much information that is just getting thrown at them constantly. Of course, they're gonna forget information. If I had to do that, I would forget stuff, right? And so rather than continually blaming the support workers, the answer for me was ongoing education, right? And so we implemented a process which was post-induction where every week or every few weeks, they get a personalized email from me, which would go through a company process. And it was personalized in the sense that it would say, hey, Jono, just wanted to touch base about XYZ thing. And because it was personalized, people thought it was addressed to them. And for a long time, people thought they were in trouble and that they'd done something wrong. And it was my passive aggressive way of educating them. And then I'd always have to say this email went to everyone, just so you know. So you might want to preface it with something like that, otherwise that's going to pop up. Now the other idea is you could do an online induction refresher. So once a year, support workers complete a 4 or 5 hour course, just covering the main things to make sure that the information, the company expectations, and policies and procedures are fresh in their mind. And I think the last thing is your induction is never really finished. We probably rewrote ours 50 times. Every time there was something that would come up, or a policy change with the NDIS would come up, or something we noticed we needed to educate more around, we were constantly tweaking, constantly changing it just to make it the best we could be. And it was an investment in our people, right? So keep this in mind. The more time you invest invest in your training, the better your training gets, the better support that your team delivers, and the better your business operates. And that's the whole point of getting your induction right.